Well, welcome everyone. We'll get started. Thank you for joining us for this Ventilation for Apartment Buildings webinar. My name's Fiona McCleary. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator at Lane Cove Council, and along with Leonie Tierney, Environmental Education Officer at Mosman Council, it's our pleasure to welcome you today. Our presenter is Brent Clark, CEO and founder of energy consultancy Wattblock. Wattblock have assisted apartment buildings housing over 60,000 residents with a range of energy savings and sustainability initiatives. So Brent has a wealth of experience in cutting energy costs for strata. If you have any questions along the way today, just pop them into the chat and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A after the presentation. But for now, I'll hand you over to Brent.
Thanks, Fiona, and welcome to Ventilation for Apartment Buildings. So this is the fourth in a four-part series of webinars, which have been sponsored by Mosman and Lane Cove Council. The first three were on lighting, hot water and solar, and today we'll conclude with ventilation. On the front page here, you can see a picture of a building from Lane Cove area called Emerant Lane, and we'll come back and have a bit more of a discussion about this building later on in the webinar. Today, we'll use the words owners corporation and body corporate interchangeably. Our strata buildings in Australia are now numbered at 340,000 buildings, according to the National Strata Insights Report 2020. 15% of households are now living in apartment blocks, and the insured value of these apartment blocks is now in excess of $1.1 trillion. So today we're going to look at how ventilation forms a part of sustainability in apartment buildings. We'll also touch on the preventative measures in a time where we have a coronavirus pandemic and how ventilation relates to that. We'll look at ventilation in 5 different areas of our apartment buildings and then finish off with a case study. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end, which you can put into the chat box, and Luani and Fiona will monitor those and we'll cover those at the end. So first of all, sustainability in apartment buildings can refer to a wide range of energy, water and waste measures, as well as preparing our apartment buildings for solar, battery and electric vehicle charging. In the coming years, we hope that all 340,000 apartment buildings in Australia start to resemble the diagram that you see on the screen now. So why upgrade ventilation in apartment buildings? First of all, it's an opportunity to reduce power and lower electricity bills in our apartment complexes. This also leads to lower carbon emissions. But there's also another important aspect that's related to ventilation, and that is improved health of residents within our apartment complexes. So we'll start off today and we'll just have a quick look at the role of ventilation in reducing contagion pathways. So one important thing is to make sure that we manage the exhaust fan pipes in our apartment buildings, that we don't have pipes that have cracks in them. This becomes important because cracks can allow contagions in droplets of water to move from one apartment into another apartment in the same building. Another item that's being considered at this particular time is in relation to foyer ventilation systems. And some buildings had, as an energy efficiency measure, put foyer ventilation systems on a timer to perhaps only operate 12 hours a day and save energy. However, during this period of time, some of those apartment buildings have actually reset their timers to run ventilation 24 hours a day through the foyers and the lift lobbies to improve the flushing effect of the air out of these parts of the building. Another thing that people are doing at the current time, particularly in apartment buildings where fire stairs can form a normal access way, sometimes to the lower apartments, or maybe the first, second or third floor, is to spend some time opening these on a routine basis to get fresh air flowing through those fire exits. If you were to open the doors into the fire stairs from each level in the building, and you had your foyer ventilation running, that would actually push some air down through the fire escape and help to flush the air in that part of the building. Another area to be cognizant of during the pandemic is bathroom extraction fans. So where you may have a bathroom or a laundry, which has like a local extraction fan, these can actually suck droplets of water out of the waste plumbing system and into the air in the bathroom. Now, one way to prevent this occurring is to check your toilets and make sure that they're flushed regularly and that the S-bends and the U-bends don't dry out. So if you keep the water in the bottom of the toilet, then that's providing a barrier from the wastewater system, which could have droplets moving from one apartment to another. Another thing to keep in mind is where you have a floor waste in, say, an internal bathroom or in a laundry. Occasionally in an apartment building, you'll detect a smell coming up, maybe the floor waste in the laundry, or maybe through a laundry basin. And you can heat some hot water in your kettle and actually tip this down the floor wastes and those old basins that maybe aren't used on a routine basis. Once again, to fill any S-bends or U-bends and prevent droplets of water moving through the wastewater system from one apartment to another. Now we'll have a look at some of the barriers to upgrading ventilation for body corporates. In our apartment complexes, and particularly in local council areas like Mosman, where 65% of residents are living in apartments, and Lane Cove, where 60% of total residents are living in apartments, you've got split incentive problems between owner occupiers and owner investors in these apartment buildings. So the owner occupiers will have more of an emphasis around amenity in the building, the living environment. And in the context of ventilation, this can refer to noise as well. In particular, we've got instances of penthouse owners in apartment buildings actually climbing up ladders to go out on the roof and turn off garbage chute exhaust fans just because they didn't like the noise that it was creating in their own apartment. So noise and health and well-being are some of the amenity items which apply to the owner occupiers, but the owner investors may not have as much of a focus on this as they're just focused on the return on investment from their rental property. Now, in Strata, we're always trying to work to improve communication between residents, and some apartment buildings are even setting up WhatsApp or WeChat messenger groups to improve the communication of everyone in the building, which can help with identifying things like noise complaints from not only ventilation fans, but also water pipes in the building. So effective communication can help combat the apathy that we sometimes have in strata in getting projects moving. Now, there is a lack of information, and that's what webinars such as today's webinar, sponsored by Mosman and Lane Cove Council, is aiming to address. Access to finance is sometimes an issue for apartment blocks that don't have a healthy capital works fund, but ventilation fan upgrades are some of the cheapest upgrades that can be done, and a timer on a ventilation fan might be as cheap as $200 for installing a new timer on an existing ventilation fan. So finance is not such a barrier when we're talking about small operational improvements, but then we'll look at a case study from Trident building later on where it's a significant investment to upgrade ventilation throughout the whole building. So the opportunity we have in our apartment buildings is to address ventilation in car park areas, foyer ventilation, garbage rooms, garbage chutes, garbage compactor rooms, bathroom and kitchen common exhaust stacks, and fire stairs pressurization. These are not the only places that you will find ventilation in our apartment buildings. You might also find them in communications rooms, electricity switch rooms, hydraulic rooms, fire control rooms, and indoor pool areas, sometimes working in conjunction with dehumidifiers. But today, we'll just focus on these 5. First of all, we'll have a look at car park carbon monoxide ventilation fans. So in underground car parks, these are required, or I should say these have been required for a number of years. Basically, you need about 4 hours of operation of these fans if they're on a timer each day to completely flush the air once per day. Sometimes you will find quite commonly that these fans are set to run 2 hours in the morning, maybe from 7 to 9 a.m., and 2 hours in the evening from 5 to 7 p.m., basically to line them up with cars exiting the building and letting out carbon monoxide fumes and re-entering the building after the work period. Another thing that can drive build-up of carbon monoxide in car parks is when people actually do work on their cars. And so you should be vigilant to look out for part-time mechanics that are perhaps using a car spot in the underground car park to work on cars. And when they're running those cars that in the basement while they're working on them, that can actually increase the carbon monoxide in your basement. Now, a very good optimization of the car park fan is if, for example, it's running on a timer, maybe 4 hours a day or 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, is to retrofit carbon monoxide sensors onto the car park fan system. So these are sensors that are typically placed about 25 meters apart throughout the basement car park area. And if they detect a buildup of carbon monoxide, they can trigger the carbon monoxide fan to run, and also to reduce the running time of the fan. I'll give you an example. In a typical apartment building that is running a carbon monoxide fan for their basement car park, say 40 units, 2 floors of basement car parking, if it were running 24 hours a day, that would probably cost the building around $6,000 in electricity per year, just for the car park fan. That can be reduced by 1/6 by running the Carpark fan just for 4 hours a day. But if you were to have a carbon monoxide sensor retrofitted, you may find that in a typical apartment block, the runtime of the carbon monoxide fan may be as little as 15 minutes or 30 minutes every 2 weeks. So this is a significant saving. Installation of each of the carbon monoxide sensors, as a rule of thumb, could be $1,800 each. Keep in mind, you may have to connect the carbon monoxide sensor system back to your fire control panel as part of your fire compliance within the building. But another good item to keep in mind is retrofitting a carbon monoxide sensor can be eligible for New South Wales government incentives under the New South Wales Energy Savings Scheme. Now, one type of retrofit to car park ventilation that's even better than retrofitting a carbon monoxide sensor is to replace the entire system, if it's possible, with a jet vent system. One of the benefits from an amenity perspective is you get rid of the ugly ducting that typically is behind all the car spaces for the carbon monoxide system. And instead of exhausting carbon monoxide out of the basement car park, a jet vent system has a sensor on each of these jet vents, and we'll show you how you would have a number of them through the car park area. But using a similar model to the fans in the Sydney Harbour Tunnel that blow carbon monoxide from one fan to another to get it out of the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, this system actually blows the carbon monoxide from one of these jet vents with gusts of air to the next one, which then gives another gust, pushing it towards a car park garage door area or naturally ventilated area where the carbon monoxide can be blown out of the car park. So here we're looking at designing a jet vent carbon monoxide ventilation solution for a car park. Basically, you would want the jet vents to be installed where they work with the topology of the roof of the car park, so that air can flow along channels within the roofing slab, and they shouldn't be positioned too low so that the blowing effect is interfered with by the presence of cars. You need about 5 newtons of thrust per 100 square meters of car park floor area. And you have to make sure that the throw pattern of the fan is long enough to reach the next impulse fan. So an apartment building that has this type of car park ventilation system is at 308 Canterbury Road in Canterbury, Bankstown. Next, we'll move on to foyer ventilation. Now, many apartment buildings have supply fans. These supply fans are just getting fresh air from outside the building and pushing it through the foyer and lift lobbies of the apartment building. Sometimes people actually confuse this with air conditioning. And in fact, it's not air conditioning, it's just fresh air from outside the building being pushed throughout the different common areas. So one way that you can test whether you have one of these fans is if you see a vent like this in your foyer or lift lobby, you can simply get a bit of tissue and hold it up to the fan and see if it's operating. You may also be able to hear this fan if you're on a lift lobby that's near the roof or a lift lobby that's typically at the ground floor level. You may be able to hear it operating when you enter the building. If this is running 24 hours a day and you feel that you've got good ventilation in the building and it's not a pandemic time, you might want to change the operating hours to just 12 hours a day cutting the cost of running the fan in half. Next, we'll have a look at garbage chute or garbage room ventilation fans. This photo is of a real fan from Gerrard Street in Cremorne that was installed at the time the building was built, 40 years ago. And it's not unusual. We also found a toilet exhaust fan in a building in Pitt Street last month that also was 40 years old. Now, the attention on a fan that, first of all, it's fantastic that any piece of equipment lasts for 40 years. But as you can imagine, fans that were made 40 years ago are not as efficient as eco fans that may have been made in 2020. And also over time, the performance of the fan will decrease such that it's drawing more current. So another thing, if you've got a fan like this that has just been forgotten in the building, it could be time to put it on the agenda and have it replaced. Bring it up at your next AGM. Alternatively, with garbage ventilation fans, some apartment buildings that do have a cleaner that is regularly scheduled to come to the building on, say, a weekly basis, it's actually can be cheaper to add an item to your cleaning contract with your existing cleaner, where they disinfect the council garbage bins, as opposed to running a fan to exhaust the smell from the garbage room. And this might be as cheap as an extra $50 a week for bin disinfecting on your cleaning contract, and then you have the option to turn the fan off altogether. Now we're going to have a look at a case study of the Trident building that's at North Steyne in Manly. This is typical of high-rise apartment buildings that were built in the 70s, and it's also very similar to many of the high-rise apartment blocks in the Gold Coast, which people may have stayed at. In particular, if you've stayed at an old apartment block on the Gold Coast, you may have noticed that when you go into the bathroom, you hear the sound of an extraction fan running all of the time. And that was the case when we first looked at ventilation at this building 5 years ago. And just to give you an idea, it has been a 5-year process from when the issue of trying to update the ventilation system for this building was first raised, and hopefully in 2020 the building is going to get a solution. Here is a diagram of the Trident building looking at it from the top. As you can see in the Trident, there are 3 apartments on each floor of the building. And what we've done is we've marked in red vertical shafts which run from the top to the bottom of the apartment building, which have exhaust fans on them. In green, we've also marked the stairwell pressurization fans, which go down the 2 fire escapes, which run from the top to the bottom of this building. So in a setup like this, if, for example, you have all of those exhaust fans running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, that's a considerable amount of energy. What can be done is an eco fan, which slows down and speeds up depending on the demand from the individual units, can be installed. However, you need some control equipment to indicate to the fan on the roof using radio frequency waves that, for example, more bathrooms are being used within a particular bathroom stack at a particular point in time. So if, for example, one of the bathroom stacks has 8 people in the bathroom having a shower, then that can be communicated to the eco fan on the roof to run faster while those people are in the bathroom and creating a lot of humidity. When people leave that bathroom, that can also be communicated to the fan. And typically this could be done through a piece of control equipment connected to the light switch of each of those bathrooms in that stack. So basically in 2020, the more people that are having a shower, the faster a fan should be running above those bathrooms. And during the middle of the night at 3 a.m, when no one is having a shower, that fan can slow right down. Next, we're going to have a look at stair pressurization fans. Once again, these are not present in all the fire stairs of our apartment buildings in areas like Lane Cove or Mosman, but they are found more commonly in the older higher rise buildings that may have been constructed in the 70s. Sometimes these stair pressurization fans do not run 24 hours a day. Sometimes they are connected to the fire control panel, and they will only activate and run if told to run when the fire system of the building detects that there is a fire in the building. Now, fire compliance is a large issue. It's very costly for our apartment buildings to maintain. And one thing I should alert our viewers to is some updates in the regulation of fire compliance in New South Wales that came into effect in April 2020. So prior to this point in time, almost anyone could call themselves a fire compliance operator. Since this regulation has come into place, it's now an accredited role, and following exams, people can gain the accreditation. The industry is a little bit slow to respond to this, but if you're in an apartment building, we've put a link to a document which Fiona will also put into the chat box for you to help you with selecting a competent fire safety practitioner. This is a new guide to help you get the best fire compliance and a regulated fire compliance operator for your apartment building. Next, we'll have a look at bathroom extraction fans, which are local to each individual apartment and may just extract through ducting out a vent on the balcony or on the side of the individual apartment. Now, this extraction fan can sometimes service 1 or 2 bathrooms, 1 or 2 bathrooms and a laundry. Perhaps it even has the range hood from the kitchen attached into it. The question we get asked the most about this is, who is responsible for this fan? Now, it can either be the responsibility of the individual lot owner, or it could be the responsibility of the owner's corporation. And this is of interest to tenants as well, particularly if they're not happy with the extraction from perhaps a 20-year-old extraction fan in their bathroom. Now, the test we have on this page, some content from a document from Strata Community Association. This document is currently being updated to a new version, but we've provided also a link to the previous version of this document from Strata Plus's website. And this is a document that says who's responsible for a whole range of things between the individual owner or the owner's corporation. In the column here we see O or OC for owner's corporation. Now, on the point of bathroom exhaust fans, we go to note number 6, which we've included at the top here. If the bathroom fan is inside the lot, it is the owner's responsibility. If it is mounted within structural cubic space, e.g. communal ducting or a full ceiling, which is designed to carry communal pipes outside the lot, then it is the responsibility of the owner's corporation. So if you are a tenant and your bathroom extraction fan is within a false ceiling area above the actual lot, then you can approach your property agent to approach the strata about the owner's corporation actually funding the upgrade of that local fan that is only to the benefit of your individual apartment. Now, just before we move on, there's one other thing which, as an energy efficiency measure, you may want to consider with bathroom extraction fans. In buildings built over the last 20 years, quite often these fans are designed to come on every single time you turn on the light switch to enter the bathroom. Now, this may be wasting energy if you're not going to have a shower, if you're just going in to wash your hands or use the toilet. And it is possible, as an owner, to get an electrician to come and install a switch that has a light switch that has 2 switches on it. So you may have the light on one circuit, on one switch, and the extraction fan on the other. And by decoupling the operation of the fan, you can actually save energy on your own internal apartment bill. So that's just one extra thing to think about for people who might have the extraction fan and the light on a single switch. You might be able to get this broken out so that it's on 2 individual switches. And finally, we'll have a look at a case study from the Lane Cove area. So Emerant Lane consists of 2 apartment buildings, and these are quite modern apartment buildings, and they were built with a carbon monoxide sensor system in the car park from day one. Our estimate is that from their common electricity bill, they're spending about $2,300 a year on ventilation costs. Note, in a building like this, which is common to most apartment buildings which are not high-rise, there's no air conditioning on common power at all. So with a simple project looking at exhaust systems in the garbage rooms of buildings A and B, the exhaust systems for the foyers, hydraulic rooms, comms room, meter and fire services, installing some timers on these different fans could save this building approximately $1,000 each year. So now we've come to the end of the formal part of the presentation, and we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Brent. Yeah, we've had a few questions come through. Peter asks, isn't it illegal to prop fire doors open? Yes,
it is. It is absolutely illegal to prop a fire door open in an apartment building. And so a strata committee could never formally say that that is something that is to be done. I'm just relating from the ground what some apartment buildings are actually doing from a health perspective during the coronavirus period, because in a pandemic, sometimes some buildings that we've seen have actually just done this to try and improve the flushing effect through the building. But you're absolutely correct. According to fire compliance, no fire door should ever be opened or chopped open in any way, shape or fashion.
Thank you. Damien has asked, you received a building order to run the car park ventilation 24 hours a day to remove CO2 and methane gas buildup. Would the changes to the ventilation require a building engineer's report?
We would recommend, if you've been given this as an instruction, yes, go and get an engineer's report on it. It's fairly draconian to be given an order to run it 24 hours a day, but I'm not sure what there are extra regulations, for example, around car park ventilation. And I'll give you one. If, for example, you are a large building that has a building manager's office located in the car park area, and that is the safe health working area for that building manager or facilities manager, then there is actually a different regulation around the time, and you will have to have a longer operating time on the car park ventilation fan.
Thank you. Ted L has asked, when are fire stair pressure fans required in a newish strata building?
So we've actually seen them disappearing from the newer strata buildings. Yeah, I would say it's basically a period that we saw them in high rise, and this is just anecdotally, I would say through the 70s, but also in the 70s, we saw fire pressurization fans on the fire stairs running 24 hours a day. And then in some of the 80s buildings, we've come across the stair pressurization fans being there and connected to the fire control unit so that they would only come on in the event of a fire. And in some of those maybe 80s blocks, we've also found carbon monoxide fans for the basement car park that don't run at all, except in the event of a fire where they're triggered by the fire compliance, by the fire panel, which wouldn't meet the current code, but that was a period. And yeah, I think what we've seen is like a gradual evolution around car park ventilation regulation. And this is for the benefit and the health of the people, you know, living or working in the strata buildings.
Thank you. That's it for the questions. Maybe, are there any other general questions that normally come up for you with ventilation?
The, you know, noise complaints around ventilation are probably the primary driver. So unless people are doing a top to bottom energy audit of their apartment complex, the number one, you know, driver from someone on the committee is that they don't like the noise from the ventilation system that's currently there. And they might be trying to use the energy efficiency angle to get a more modern system, perhaps, you know, a jet vent car park system, as opposed to, you know, to replace one of those really noisy carbon monoxide fans that wind up and create a huge sound when they turn on and run, and might be right underneath a ground floor unit, creating vibration for that apartment. So when it comes to ventilation, the other thing we should mention is, you know, this is very much in the fire safety practitioner area. But when we visited buildings along with those accredited fire practitioners, we have found problems. They've picked up, you know, that in, say, a 70s building, you actually have exhaust fans in fire stairwells where you should have had fire stair pressurization in a building. And, you know, you can see that by the grit on the grill at the top of the the fire escape. And so you end up, based on the time period around ventilation, the time period of the building being constructed, there are some weird and wonderful items that we found in the world of apartment building ventilation.
Well, thank you, Brendan. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll be emailing you a link to this webinar as well as the links that I put in the chat, so you can follow up and get some more information there. But that's it from us now. So again, thanks for joining us and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.